Ukraine, for no fault of its own, remains a constant source of refugees. The number of Ukrainian refugees is on the increase here in Canada. Upon their arrival, however, they face a number of issues. Healthcare coverage for refugee status seekers here is effectively non-existent. Getting a work permit here can take anywhere up to 8 months.
It's one of the key elements of our election platform. We absolutely appreciate that the immigration system is broken and is not serving immigrants properly. You mentioned refugee health. This is an outrage. And this is a new, cruel measure enacted by this government, and we would reverse it. That is an absolute platform commitment. Canada needs to be a country that welcomes refugees. My own family came here from a DP camp. I know many people here came here in that way. And now, you know, it's not just Ukrainian refugees, but we're treating them dreadfully. And not only is that morally wrong, it goes against our own self-interest. We all know that refugees who have come to Canada, I would say the Ukrainian-Canadian community, I would say the Hungarians after '56, Vietnamese boat people have hugely enriched our country. And, you know, in terms of immigration, I absolutely agree with you. You know, as an MP, the single biggest issue my office deals with is people who are trapped in the immigration system. And, you know, we will fix that. You know, I think that right now, you know, and people who are trapped in the system feel this. People outside maybe aren't aware of how badly we have come to treat immigrants. It's sort of a presumption of guilt, a presumption you've done something wrong, and a very slow-moving system. It's a real priority for us to change that.
And there's a component, I mean, again, I'll lay all my cards on the table. I came to this country as an Idi Amin exile from a refugee movement in 1972. I was 10.5 months old, but what is critical for our
Good choice.
But what's critical is that the opportunities that were provided to newcomers like me and my family when we were staying in a YMCA in downtown Montreal in 1972 have been eroded significantly by a series of governments. And part of the impetus as to why I'm running is to replace a lot of those lost opportunities for people such as the residents of Parkdale in this community, for example. But I think what's critical is also that this forms a broader component to something Yvan addressed, Chrystia addressed, Borys has addressed, which is a humanitarian response to these various crises. And it's not just a Ukrainian issue, because now we're talking about Syria. We're talking about other parts of the world where we debate as to what the foreign policy response should be, and it needs to be contextual, it needs to be broad, it needs to have a number of different facets. So while there's an element of providing training for soldiers on the ground who are Ukrainian soldiers who need Canadian assistance, there should also be a complementary piece which is addressing the humanitarian crisis that has been caused in Ukraine, and that's the exact same position that we're advocating in Syria. Not to cherry-pick particular religious minorities, but to deal with the burgeoning humanitarian crisis that is the largest, according to Ban Ki-moon, that the world has seen in recent memory that is in Syria. So that's a fundamental component of what we're trying to address, broadly speaking, on a number of different global fronts.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on this. 56 and the Hungarian Revolution, all the refugees we accepted at that time, is a wonderful example. And it's been pointed out, all four of us at this table, and most of you in this room, are the children and grandchildren of political refugees. Political refugees have made an incredible contribution to this country. Here's an advantage the Ukrainian-Canadian community has. We have a long history here, and we have institutions of various sorts. Chrystia mentioned the schools. We're sitting in an institution that helps refugees sometimes. We have all these institutions, and we should say, okay, in partnership with the Canadian government, we have these institutions. If the Canadian government stepped forward, how many people could we help? Whether it's Crimean Tatars, whether it's Ukrainians or Russians from Donetsk, how many people could we help? And let's open up a consular section in Kyiv and start working on this. I really believe that in this next government, not only will we reverse on many of those policies, but more specifically dealing with the huge humanitarian problem that Ukraine faces. Ukraine's economy is in desperate straits. And to have to absorb the cost of 1 million internally displaced refugees, it's amazing that Ukraine is still viable. And that would be a priority for me, to sit down with the UCC, Ukrainian Canadian Congress, and say, okay, all of our institutions, how many could we absorb with the resources of the government in partnership? How can we help Ukraine with its refugee crisis at this time?
I think we may have time for maybe just one or two more questions.